Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, thanks for the introduction. I'm Dan Gray, work for Ford, ownership marketing. Um, but this is really all about Cory. But I do want to say that we are making our return to F1
Let's
in
go. Let's
2026. So
go.
very excited to have
Very
an
excited about that.
iconic American brand
It's gonna be
to
great.
come to F1. But Cory over here, he's a big car guy as well. But
It's
I'll
true.
let him introduce himself. Uh, he has his title up there, but a lot of what we want to talk about today also has to deal with his other brand. And I will just
Yeah,
kick
we'll
it
get
over to
there. Yeah,
you.
so it's all good. Hi, everybody. I'm Cory Minton. As the thing says, Field Chief Technology Officer. Basically, I sit at the intersection between our products and technology innovation and our most important customers here in the Americas. So I spend a lot of time with CIOs, CTOs, CISOs. For those of you who don't know Splunk, because it's not a household brand, we're a data analytics company that's focused on security and IT operations. So 92 of the Fortune 100 customers count on us for securing their critical IT and cybersecurity infrastructure. So it's one that whether you know it or not, you're using Splunk on a daily basis. You're probably interacting with websites and companies that are trusting Splunk to make sure that those digital services are safe and resilient and doing exactly as they should. And so, yeah, I'm super excited. The best part of my job is one, I love technology. I get to talk to people. But as McLaren, we actually, Splunk signed a sponsorship agreement with McLaren about 4 years ago, and I get to lead the technical activation between McLaren and Splunk and get to do all the cool technical marketing content creation. So that's a little bit about me.
And he has a great beard. Do you all agree? So he has taken that insight and his personality and branded it.
Yeah, it's true.
So will you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
Big Data Beard?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent, yeah. So I have a blog and a podcast called Big Data Beard. It's on a pause right now, but we're gonna kind of restart some things. But it's been about 8 years ago now. I was working for Dell as a similar sort of principal engineer role, and I was always trying to learn. I think it's one of the lessons that we're all hearing is as new technologies come out, we're always trying to learn. And so engineers are doing the same thing, and I would call, I'd go to these conferences and see these, innovative technologies, and I'd say, hey, I'd love to learn more. Can I talk to your founder, your CEO to learn more about it? And they'd be like, well, why do I want to talk to a guy at Dell? You're nobody. Get out of here, buddy. And then I was like, well, that's kind of a bummer. And I wasn't getting where I wanted to. So I started a podcast, and we went out, and a few of the people we knew came on and did shows with us that were pretty credible. And so the next time I picked up the phone and would call these folks, and I'd say, hey, my name's Cory. I run one of the most successful podcasts in big data and artificial intelligence. Would you like to be on my show? And people started paying us to have their founders and CEOs and CTOs on their show. And it really became a pretty neat opportunity for us. We built a whole brand. I had a team of 3 folks that were contributing to it, all in our side hustle. But it was kind of a crazy thing because it led to all of us becoming known personalities and influencers. We actually entered in influencer agreements with Microsoft and Disney and Splunk, and paid engagements, started doing event marketing kind of things that were super nerdy technical activations, but given the audiences, they were very on brand. And so, yeah, so it grew a brand. And actually, the proudest thing I would say about that is not just the, personal profile and that kind of stuff. It's that everybody that was part of it, the 3 other people, all of us have at least doubled our, take home income since participating in it. So it was a very good personal thing to see, not just me, but the team be made better for it.
Yeah, and Cory, can you talk about how it opened some of those doors that you were knocking on before, and now that you could
Yeah.
fall back on this and talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, just it's one of those things that we all talk about, sort of that authenticity, right? That's been something we've talked about a lot. It's being able to have the knowledge and the connections that you can actually represent a brand well. And as I'm not necessarily a marketer by trade, but I go out and deal with our customers. I speak to our analyst community. I talk to partners every day about what we're doing as a company, and that learning certainly was formative in building the capabilities to do so. But it also made me a known commodity in some of those places. So it opened up a lot of doors. And candidly, it's why I ended up getting the job at Splunk as a field CTO. Was they legit reached out while I was. And I'm gonna take a little side story about this one. This one's kind of a nerd one. I told you I was a nerd, and I'll tell you how. So we one of the event activations we did before I worked at Splunk but for Splunk's big conferences, 2 weeks before their conference, we took an RV and we outfitted it with a bunch of sensors, so industrial, Internet of Things sensors, and we drove it across the country for 2 weeks, and we splunked the whole thing. Now, I work for a company called Splunk, but before I did, their software, you can get data off all these sensors, much like we do with Formula One cars, and you can make sense of it, and you can learn things, and you can publish things. And so we wrote all this we did blogs and podcasts and all this thing along the way. And we drove a 42-foot RV onto the floor of the Venetian Conference Center that was all outfitted with all this gear, and we did like demos and stuff like that. Now, the fun thing that it opened up the door for me was that this was like the RV that I showed up in with my team, and then I had all the executives of Splunk come through and do podcasts with me. And they were, when we were done with the podcast, I was like, "Oh, by the way, I'm being recruited. Do you want to have a conversation?" And I had like 7 interviews in the RV. It was a total power move. So it was, yeah, use your influence for good and sometimes for your own good.
That's great. That's great. I mean, so you are connecting very in an authentic way
Yeah,
with your customers, and we kind of just talk more about that
yeah,
and how you really do that in a way
for
that
sure.
you're not making something up or
Yeah, man. And it's honestly, it's one of the things that you'll. So when we were talking about sort of planning and what we wanted to talk about, the one thing I wanted you all to hear is sort of this story, which is, you know, you have a responsibility to represent your brands well and in an authentic way, and that is something that I took super seriously. For Splunk and McLaren. So Splunk, again, I told you all, it's an analytics platform, right? That's pretty straightforward. There's lots of them out there. But we wanted to do something more. Like when we signed the agreement with Splunk or with McLaren, we got the pretty, logo on the side of the car. We get to do hospitality events, and that's all lovely. But I looked at it and I said, we actually can do some things for McLaren that can actually make them better at something. And then we can use that story to actually go activate our brand publicly and engage the audiences that would actually care about what our brand does. And so we actually embarked on a journey over the last 3 years to find ways to uniquely use Splunk's technology for McLaren's good. And not just as a customer, like they are certainly a customer, but also as a like technical marketing engagement. How do we help you do some things that we did it purely for the benefit of, creating content? So one is we help them, monitor all of the infrastructure that goes out on track. So who here's an actual F1 fan? They like know some things about F1. Who here's seen Drive to Survive? Okay, have you seen like the behind the scenes in those paddocks? And if y'all are on the paddocks today or even this weekend, you'll see that there's tons of there's tons of technology going on back there. And behind the scenes, there's like 3 or 4 racks of data center equipment that go out with every single one of these race teams. And it runs things. The most important thing it runs is telemetry. And telemetry simply means that there are, on most of the cars, there's about 300 sensors that are sending data back to that environment about 10 to 10,000 times per second. Every single race team creates, just in this telemetry data, about 1 to 2 terabytes of data every single weekend. That's not inclusive of video. This is just telemetry off the car. That data is important because you can't put a Formula One car on the track if that telemetry system isn't working. The engineers would literally, like, if they get a certain number of sensors that are no longer reporting, they pull the car off the track because you're talking about a $15 million asset that is being monitored in real time and they have to know what's going on. So we make sure that all of that infrastructure is secured, that it's running well. We create for the team these dashboards that say, are you getting the latencies that you expect? Like all these monitoring nerdy things, which is cool. The really fun part was when McLaren decided to really double down on esports. So any esports fans here? If it's not, okay. Does anybody have kids that are really into gaming? Okay, have you said to them, have you like they're playing too many video games and you're like, you need to quit doing that. You'll never make a living doing that. My parents told me that it's a lie. They can actually make a good living today. We talk about influencers. Some of the best paid influencers are gamers these
they're
days.
doing college scholarships now
Yeah, absolutely. Actually,
for esports.
I went. I'm working with the University of Limerick, who is actually offering a PhD program in sim racing analytics. So like that, I'm literally, this is you can get a PhD in this stuff. So don't lie to your kids anymore, folks. It's not true. let their nerd flags fly. So anyway, so the whole like esports thing has exploded. It's a digital disruption to motorsports, but it's a great thing because it's an accessible way for so many people to engage in motorsports, which is cool. But this year was the first year that all 10 Formula One teams are actually competing in a Formula One backed esports series. And so they actually, it's so important now to McLaren that they moved one of their strategists that was a Formula One strategist. You know, the people in the back that are making decisions about tires and all that stuff. They moved him over from Formula One to esports and said, go implement strategies that we use in real Formula One in esports. And so he actually, this gentleman's name is George Simmons. He saw all the vendors that were sponsors, and he started doing some research, and he found a bunch of videos on YouTube that my team had done around sim racing analytics. So things that we had done sort of adjacent to them, but not really for them. It was more for like conferences and stuff like that. And he slid into my DMs on Twitter, to use the phrase. I think that's still the appropriate term. So he slid into my DM and he goes, "Hey, this was cool. Like, y'all built some cool things that are neat, but," he's like, "you're missing one really critical one that I'd like to work with you on. And if you can build it for me, I'm pretty sure it could be like a make or break thing for our season." And I was like, okay. So we started working with him, and it was I won't bore you with all the details, but it was basically like a visualization that would populate in real time that would give him really interesting information about how lap times were trending across the entire field, and start to project based on what tire decisions had been made. Because y'all know, like, the main thing you're going to see on Sunday, the main thing that matters is which tires are doing what and how do you line up your pit times to optimize your finish, right? That's the main thing strategy comes down to. So that's what he wanted to figure out in esports. And nobody had figured this out yet. So we actually wrote a custom application to get about 300 metrics out of the game that they're using. So we take the telemetry out of the game, and then we built this strategy dashboard for him that enabled him to make decisions. And the great story here is that not only with some great driving did they win the drivers championship this year, but he came out and publicly said that we won the constructors championship in large part because of the strategy that we implemented in Splunk. So we gave them a real time competitive advantage using data to benefit them. And it candidly came back to a bunch of social media marketing that our team had done. And then it perpetuated itself, right? So that's the story of using influence for good.
That's yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. And then you told me a story about the TED Talk.
Yeah.
That was really interesting and how virtual and real life
Yeah.
kind of blend together.
Yeah, so back to that story about, don't tell your kids they can't make a living playing video games. So most video games don't really have a transference of skill. By that I mean, if your kids are really good at Call of Duty or one of these, first person shooter games, you can't put a gun in their hand and make them a soldier. Like, this doesn't translate to actually doing the thing. However, racing and technically most of this like flight simulator kind of stuff too, those skills are transferable. And so we actually did a TED Talk. It's now had at the actual TED conference. My peer in the UK who did the talk, it's had over like 2.7 million views already. So he tells a story about a young man who came up through the karting world. So karting's where a lot of the F1 folks get started, and he wasn't able to continue karting once he hit the age of 16. It just got too expensive. Family couldn't support it, so he started sim racing competitively, and he continued sim racing. And then he actually entered a McLaren sponsored esports challenge where they were giving away the chance to like go meet somebody at McLaren and get a real chance to drive a car. So he did it. He won this global competition, and then he ended up getting a seat. And he actually set. They were there for a British Grand Prix event, not Grand Prix, British GT event, Grand Touring. He actually set the second fastest lap time of the day amongst all professional drivers on the track. So a kid that had got started out in into karting, taken years off, sim racing, comes out and is literally a podium sort of driver, and he now has a professional racing career. And what's funny is I just found out that there's another story like this, that actually there's a movie coming out that's got like Orlando Bloom and some other. It's called the Gran Turismo movie. It's an identical story, but it's two different people. And I found out they know each other, which is kind of fun. But it's these skills are transferable from this esports and gaming in certain contexts to real life. So it makes it really accessible. Because I don't know if y'all know this, but racing is expensive. A racing simulator is not that much. For a couple $100 with a Xbox and a cheap steering wheel, you can go racing and develop the acuity to be competitive and open up opportunities. So
Yeah, and we were talking about that audience, right?
yeah,
That audience that are into gaming, kind
yeah,
of techie,
yeah,
and where they can probably aspire to
yeah,
as they get older, and kind of they're kind of high net worth type
yeah.
individuals that are going to expand their careers whenever they're going to do.
Yeah, it's true. So we started sponsoring a lot of the esports competitions purely for the purpose that we learned in our conversations with McLaren that the two top employment categories for people that are consumers of esports materials are IT and cybersecurity. Those are our two most critical audiences, right? So we've decided to invest heavily in the esports, sponsorships of events and such, because we know that those folks have a high proclivity to be our early buyers, right? They're the users. They'll go into college, they'll likely use our technology in a computer science program potentially. They'll go to their first job out of college. We're in 92 of the Fortune 100, so there's a good chance they're going to interact early in their career in cybersecurity with us, and they will have seen our brand in the things that they love, that they invest their time in. And then as they go through their career, right, they're continuing to see that we're a platform that can support, what their objectives are. And when they become the buyers, the economic buyer of that platform, then we've followed them along in their life cycle. So it's really that multi-year journey that we want to take with customers on authentically connecting with the things they care about, showing them ways that it's like we're manifesting what Splunk does for the benefit of esports teams, but also meeting them along their career trajectory for, hoping that they become long-term, high spend customers.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing the same thing over at Ford, and we are sponsoring gaming,
Love it.
gaming teams. We are working with developers and
Yep.
sponsoring tournaments as well. So it's
Yep.
pretty interesting. So we have a room full of you know brand marketers
Yeah.
here, and you obviously have a great tech background.
Yeah.
Would love to give your insight on how us as marketers
Hmm.
can work really closely with subject matter experts like yourself, um, for our different strategies and really connecting with our customers.
No, that's great. I'll actually echo something that was said by the previous gentleman, and the from a legal perspective, invite us to the table, right? As you think about what your company does, the ways that your organization creates value, whether it's raw materials to a product, or it's people and time to outcomes for organizations, whatever that value creation is. What are the subject matter experts that really deeply understand, or to use a Bay Area term, that grok your value stream, right? Find those folks and invite them to the table, and help have them inform and participate in your content creation, or at least in making sure that the things that you're saying are actually what your brand does. And I think that was something similar you heard from Celsius, which is like we want it to be what our brand actually does, not something that's just this pie in the sky. We don't want influencers who don't actually use it. Same idea with your general brand is like invite the subject matter experts in to make sure that you're technically on brand, you're on voice, you're following what you do, you're really understanding that value chain. And don't be afraid to democratize content creation, because all content, isn't good, but there's places for all types of content. So find ways to democratize. That's one of the biggest sort of wins that I've had in the last 3 years with Splunk, is that we've created a process for geeks and the SMEs, right? The people that are out in the field that know the thing, to be supported without a lot of too much help, but given some guide rails to go create their own content, to go do things in social that help our brand, that really like they're the ones that are talking to the engineers and the technologists that are buying things from us. So everything doesn't have to come from the corporate channels. It certainly can come from our employees, but also, lighter weight platforms like TikTok and others that are maybe not what you use for your big brand moments, but certainly can use for authentic connection.
Great. And then when we talk about big data, what are your thoughts on privacy overall? Kind of high level.
I think the fact that we're not saying that Chat GPT, the biggest concern we should all have is privacy on that, is that we're missing the boat. And I think and it actually goes back to the same thing with the conversation about the song being created by AI. It's a privacy, it's a governance, it's a copyright issue. I think those are some of the biggest concerns. I think the use will find there's two things, that I think are true. One, I think government organizations, but also industry organizations have to start applying some rules to it. But I also don't want to I don't want to overfear anybody, because I think that if you're familiar, there's these hype cycles, right? That Gartner talks about them all the time. We're in the top. It's hype. I'll say that I counter the argument for like privacy and concern is like none of you all are worried about going out and Google searching things, right? CIOs and CTOs aren't worried about the employees Googling things. So why do we care about them, you know, putting things on ChatGPT? The one that's like really common is if you're a software developer, people go out and put things on Stack Overflow. Like they'll expose like your entire like source code on a regular basis on Stack Overflow, and they allow that to happen. But then the security team's like, well, we can't really allow ChatGPT in, and it's like, well, you do that, but not this. It's very double edged, sort of double standard sort of thing. So I would say that my advice is, think about logical governing and think about ways that you can apply some policies that make sense, given that it's not like the technology is new, but it's not doing you're not interacting with it that differently. You're giving it data, it's giving you something back in return. Use logic and common sense on the ways that you govern that, I think is really important. The other is like you can assume that basically there's nothing private anymore. And if you really want it private, then you really should be having some very close conversations with your cybersecurity team about how to air gap things that most of the things that are in your employees, laptops or out of them, there you should assume no privacy.
That's great. So let's do some fun questions.
Yeah.
Um, favorite beard product?
Oh man, I'm gonna expose the hipster in me, I guess. I make my own because
What ingredients are in?
so I have a proprietary blend of beeswax, cotton, or what's it, coconut oil. I'm a big fan of bergamot as a smell. That's one of the. But you got to have something in there that soothes the skin, like a little tea tree oil. Yeah, it's something like that.
You heard it here first. Um, so with your podcast,
Yeah.
Big Data Beer, I mean, you gotta love big data for your guests,
Yeah,
right?
it's fantastic. Yeah.
But do they have to have a beard to be on your
No,
podcast?
actually, and that's one of the things I think, beards are probably one of the most inclusive things there are. Everybody can have one. And they're one of our the three people that were on our team was a young lady. So like it's certainly possible. But yeah, I know they're not required. They're certainly encouraged. I will say I've done a couple of we did a couple of events where the CIO at Dell is the lady named Jen Felch, and we met her in Austin, and she came out of the office to come meet with us, and she had a fake beard on, and I was like, "It's not required, but I certainly appreciate the support. That's good."
That's great. And then Corey and I found out that we were both in college at the same time. We both went to Texas A&M.
That's right. Whoop.
So we were running around College Station at the same time a couple years ago. But what's your favorite Aggie tradition?
Ooh, favorite tradition is probably yell practice. I love yell practice. For those of you who don't know, Texas A&M is it's one of the largest universities in the country. We don't cheer, we don't have cheerleaders, we yell. And so it's an old military school. It was military until the 60s, right? And so we have this tradition where we all yell together at the football games, and we have yell leaders that give signs, and then we all do it together. But on the night before a big football game at about 11:30, we all gather at the stadium, and usually it's about 40 to 50,000 people come to the stadium on Friday night, and the yell leaders and the football team comes out, the coach tells some funny stories, and then they do a yell practice where they go through all the yells together to make sure that everybody's yelling in unison. And then at midnight, ideally you bring a date, because at midnight they kill the lights in the stadium, and we call it mugging down. You get a chance to make out with your date, and if you didn't bring a date, then you hold a lighter up, and you go find another lighter, and mug down with your friend. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Well, Corey, we went to school quite a while ago,
Yeah, it's
but
we're
I
old. It's
hear
fine.
now that they don't have lighters; they just hold up their cell phones.
That math checks out. Yeah, I
You
can
know,
see that. Yeah,
so they have their
and probably just a bunch of people swiping
flashlight.
on
Yeah,
Tinder, looking like.
yeah, absolutely.
Also, the other thing we found out is that while I am a fan of McLaren because of our relationship with from Splunk, I'm actually secretly a enormous Ford fan, and like could not be happier. So my family owned a Ford dealership for 35 years in East Tennessee. I grew up in the car business, grew up around Ford. So thank you for the opportunity to hang out with you.
Yeah,
And let's go Ford in 2026.
yeah,
Let's
we'll
go.
get there. We'll get there for sure. Great. Would love to take some questions if we have some time.
Yes, sir. That's a great question. Yeah, we end up using most of the events like the paddock experiences here, those kinds of things, purely as a networking opportunity for the executives that we have at events. Although I'll tell you, there's an interesting challenge that Formula One presents, and maybe you all have experienced this, but it's something that we deal with, which is the tickets have gotten so expensive for things like these lifestyle events that are large, cool sporting events. It actually creates compliance concerns for a large number of customers. So we actually, because the value of the ticket is so high, there are concerns from a legal perspective that it could be considered bribery because the value is so high. So it's actually made it kind of challenging for us to use some of these really high-end experiences, even though we have customers that are, spending, tens if not $100 million a year with us, that we're like, this would be it's a rounding error from a, thank you perspective. It just creates a huge challenge for us. So that's one thing I would just say, kind of an unintended consequence that we struggle with things that are so nice that it's actually becoming a real problem, especially in our public sector. The all of the big three letter agencies are customers, and they are completely unallowed to participate in things like this. So that's a challenge. The other is that we're trying to insert ourselves in brand, logical ways. Like if you go to the McLaren paddock, you're going to see some racing simulators that are there. Well, last time I was there, they were using like a chalkboard to keep, or a whiteboard to keep up with the list of, who's got the fastest laps for a prize. And we're looking at them going, why aren't you using Splunk? Like, we have that written. Like, let's do that. And we're going to the same thing. You'll walk around. If you go to the grandstand, Formula One brings out 2 trailers worth of simulators. They line them all up and they're playing games. And there's literally people writing things down. I'm like, would you guys use us? Like, use the technology vendors that know how to do this stuff. So we're trying to activate those to make authentic things. The other thing we're thinking about is just other events that can use the stories. So we bring people like Zach and Lando and Oscar out for events to engage people more as a, it's just neat to have access to those folks as part of the sponsorships. Don't
Okay.
don't be afraid of AI, but be nice to your nerds and invite them to the party every now and then.
Thank you.